Wyoming Territory, 1878. The wind had just started kicking up dust along the main street of Laramie when Hector Barnes dropped dead in front of the saloon, and every head turned not to the man, but to the woman standing beside him. Hollis Beauregard did not flinch. She just stepped back once, slow, while the whispers started to rise like heat off the street. She was standing right there, same as with her father last spring. And that banker in Cheyenne. She's cursed. Bad luck, that one. Hollis heard it all, same as she always did. She walked away. She had been walking away her whole life. Now 25, she had no family left, no real friends, and no place that wanted her for long. She kept her head down and worked hard enough to keep food on her plate and a roof over her head. But it never lasted. People talked. People remembered. Men near her had a habit of dying young. She was not cursed, but she had stopped trying to argue about it. Hollis just kept moving. That week, she found work cooking and cleaning at a freight station outside town, a rough stop for supply wagons heading north. She stayed quiet, kept her eyes low, and tried not to be noticed. But it was hard not to glance at the cowboy who rode in 3 days later. He came alone, with dust on his boots and a saddlebag slung over one shoulder. His horse was lean and steady. His name was Callum Kearney. He had the kind of face that looked better with a little dirt on it, and eyes like the sky just before a storm broke. He was not loud like the others. When he spoke, it was soft and careful, like he weighed every word. Hollis first noticed him when he held the door open for her without saying a thing. Just tipped his hat and moved aside. She nodded once and kept walking. But her heart had jolted in her chest like a startled bird. He noticed her too. Not just her face, not just how she moved like she was always ready to run, but how the others looked at her. How they paused when she entered a room. How they whispered. That night, he asked old Dan, the station keeper, "What's with the girl?" Dan spat tobacco into the dirt. "They call her Bad Luck Beauregard. Man dies near her. Folks say it is her fault. Superstition, but it sticks." Callum frowned. "That true?" Dan shrugged. 3 men in 5 years. Maybe 4. She never touched them. But people got long memories. Callum said nothing after that. But he watched her closer. The first time they spoke was 2 days later. She was hauling a bucket of water from the pump, and the handle slipped. Water splashed her dress, and the metal clanged against the ground. She cursed softly under her breath. Callum was there before she could pick it up. He crouched and steadied the pail, then handed it over. "Let me help you," he said. "I can do it," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I know," he said. Still, she took the bucket. "Thanks." He did not leave. "You always carry everything by yourself?" She looked at him then, square in the eye. "I do not have anyone else." He just nodded. "You do now." That made her stop. "Why?" He looked down at his boots, then back at her. "Because you look like you could use someone who is not scared of you." Her throat tightened. She turned away before he could see the heat rising in her eyes. Over the next few days he kept showing up, helping with chores, sharing coffee in the early mornings, walking beside her during supply runs. He never pushed, never asked questions, but he stayed. She started to feel it, the quiet comfort of someone standing beside her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. It was new. It was terrifying. Then came the storm. Late one night, thunder rolled in and rain fell like bullets. The roof of the bunkhouse started to leak. Hollis was still outside, trying to tie down the supply tarp when the wind ripped it from her hands. She slipped in the mud and hit the ground hard. And then he was there. Callum hauled her up with both hands, water pouring off his hat, his shirt soaked through. "You all right?" he asked, voice barely heard over the wind. She nodded, shivering. "I am fine." "No, you are not." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her to block the wind. She did not fight it. Her fingers clutched the fabric of his shirt without meaning to. After the storm passed, they sat by the fire in the main cabin, wrapped in blankets. She had never sat so close to a man before, not like that. Not with her heart thudding like it had something to say. "I do not believe what they say about you," Callum said. Hollis stared into the flames. "Why not?" "Because I have seen you. You are strong. Kind. They do not see it, but I do." She looked up at him, her face open for the first time. "I am tired of running," she whispered. "Then stop," he said. "Let me be the place you stay." Her breath caught. She had not cried in years. But now, sitting beside him, her hand in his, she felt something crack open. She leaned in, pressed her forehead to his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her and held her like he meant it. She did not know it yet, but that was the moment everything started to change. And neither of them would ever be alone again. The sun rose slow over the ridgeline, pale and watery behind thinning clouds. The storm had passed, but the ground still held its memory: slick earth, broken branches, the scent of wet sagebrush clinging to everything. Hollis stood at the edge of the pasture behind the station, her skirts damp at the hem, boots sinking just slightly into the soft dirt. She kept her arms folded tight, chin tucked low. Her hair was still damp from the night before, pulled back in a braid that had come loose at the end. Callum's horse was grazing nearby, tethered to a post. He crouched beside it, checking the cinch and brushing down the animal's flanks. When he saw her, he stood without hurry. "You sleep any?" he asked. "No," she said. "You?" He shook his head. "Too much wind in my head." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased. He walked to her, careful not to close the distance too fast. "You ain't used to anyone being close, are you?" he asked. "I don't know what to do with it," she said. "Well, you don't have to do anything," he said. "Just let it be." They stood quiet for a long while. The wind had settled, but the air still carried a chill. "Where were you before here?" she asked. "North Platte. Drove cattle east till the season ended. Before that, Montana Territory. Spent a winter trapping, but I don't fancy that kind of cold again." "You always on the move?" "Seemed easier than trying to belong somewhere," he said. "Until now." She looked down at her hands. "People talk if you stay near me." "I've heard worse than talk," he said. "That's not the same." "No, but it rhymes with enough of my past that I don't mind." She looked up at him then, and something in her gaze held steady, like the first time a colt lets you touch its muzzle without flinching. "I don't know what to make of you," she said. "You don't have to make anything. I'm just here." The wind picked up again, brushing hair across her cheek. She didn't move to fix it. He reached out and tucked it behind her ear, his fingers rough from leather and rope, but gentle as they passed her skin. Later that day, they rode out together to check a broken fence line past the creek. The work was slow, the wagon tracks half washed away, and the boards splintered from wind damage. She carried the nails while he set the posts, and they barely spoke as they moved along the fence. But the quiet between them had shifted. It wasn't distance anymore, it was something settled, something shared. At the last post, she handed him the final rail without speaking. He took it, then paused. "You always this steady when things fall apart?" he asked. "It's the only time I know what to do," she said. He nodded, hammer resting across his shoulder. "Then maybe you're the kind of person a man should build something with." She blinked. "You don't even know half of me. You keep showing me pieces. That's enough." They walked back beside the horses. Her hand brushed his once, not by accident. That evening, Hollis sat alone on the porch steps, watching the sky go amber at the horizon. Callum came out with 2 tin mugs of coffee, one for her. She took it without a word. He sat beside her, not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth between them. "I was engaged once," she said suddenly, eyes forward. "He died in a barn fire. Folks said I cursed him." He didn't answer right away. She took that as permission to keep going. "After that, I stopped looking people in the eye. Figured if they couldn't see me, they wouldn't blame me for what came next." Callum looked out over the prairie. "You ever think maybe it's not about blame at all? Maybe folks just need something to be afraid of." "Then why aren't you?" "Because I've seen fear and I've seen you. They don't look the same." She set her cup down, hands folding together in her lap. "I'm trying to believe this is real." "It is," he said. "I'm real, Hollis, and I want to be here with you." She turned her head slowly, met his eyes. "I don't know how to stop expecting it to fall apart." "Then don't," he said. "Just let it hold anyway." She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. It wasn't bold. It wasn't certain. But it was hers to give. And he held it like it mattered. The cottonwoods along the creek had gone gold overnight. Their leaves stirred in the breeze like coins in a gambler's hand, flashing light and shadow along the water. Hollis stood by the edge, sleeves rolled up, washing a skillet with sand and riverstone. Her mind wandered. Not far, just enough to feel something stretch inside her where it had been tight before. Behind her, Callum's boots padded soft over the grass. She didn't turn, but she knew it was him. "You always do dishes out here?" he asked. "The ones that don't belong to me, yes," she said. "Station pans are full of grease and bad history." He crouched beside her, dipping his hand in to fish out a bit of charred bacon from the bottom of the creek. "Dan says the Army's sending up another supply run next week," he said. "From Fort Laramie. That'll bring trouble. Most things do." She handed him the skillet. "Rinse that." He did as told, swishing it through water until the last soap grit was gone. When he passed it back, their fingers brushed, and this time she didn't pull away. "Tell me something true," he said. She looked sideways at him. "Everything I've ever told you's been true." "I know. I want more of it." She set the skillet aside and sat back on her heels, brushing damp grit from her palms. "I used to sing," she said. "In church before my mother passed. Folks said I had a fine voice. Do you still?" "No," she said. "It left me after." Callum didn't press. He just nodded once and sat beside her, legs stretched out, boots in the grass. "I carved my first saddle when I was 14, he said. "Didn't know how to stitch a rig properly. Horse threw me 3 times before I gave up and went back to store-bought." "You don't look like someone who gives up easy." "Didn't say I stayed given up." The breeze shifted. Hollis tucked her hair behind her ear, fingers pausing on the ribbon she'd tied that morning, a faded strip of blue muslin, the only color she wore. "I almost left last spring," she said. "Packed my things, saddled a mule, and made it as far as the edge of town." "What stopped you?" There was a boy sweeping the porch of the mercantile. He looked up and smiled like I was someone worth staying for. Her voice faltered. "I wasn't." "You sure about that?" "I wasn't ready." Callum leaned back on his elbows, watching the sky. "And now?" She didn't answer. Her silence held weight, but not resistance. Just the long work of figuring out what to do with hope once it started blooming. By the time they walked back, the clouds had thickened. It wasn't rain, not yet, but the kind of gray that made the world feel quieter. Inside the station kitchen, she set the skillet back on its hook and hung her apron by the stove. "Callum," she said softly. He stopped by the door, hat in hand. "If you stay through winter," she said, "we'll need to fix the chimney in the back room. Smoke's been leaking into the rafters." He turned to her, eyes steady. "You want me to stay?" She nodded. I think I do. I will then. She stepped toward him, slow and certain, and touched his jaw with her fingers. It was the first time she'd reached for him without fear. The first time she'd let herself want something in daylight. He kissed her, just once, careful and sure. There was nothing rushed in it. Nothing claimed. Just a promise, pressed between them like the space between heartbeats. And when she pulled back, she didn't look away. By mid-October, the nights had grown sharp with frost, and daylight pulled in early like a curtain drawn tight. The freight station was quieter now, with fewer wagons coming through and the drivers more inclined to stay a night or two if the stove was hot and the stew thick. Callum had taken to mending tack along the porch bench, hands steady even in the cold. Hollis watched from the window once as he threaded a new strap through the rigging of his saddle, brow drawn in concentration. She didn't step outside. She just watched, letting her breath fog the glass. That evening, after she scrubbed the supper pots and hung the dishcloth to dry, she found him near the stable, lantern hung low on a nail. He was oiling the hinges on the gate, the sleeve of his shirt rolled to the elbow. You always fix things that don't belong to you? She asked. He didn't look up. Only when I plan to stay long enough to use them. She leaned against the post, arms crossed. You planning something? He wiped his hands on a cloth. Thinking about asking Dan if I can build on the north edge. That bluff past the pastures dry and level. Her mouth parted, but no words came. He faced her fully. I won't do it unless you want me to. She stepped forward, close enough to smell the linseed oil on his skin. There's an old cabin up there. Roof caved in, walls near gone. My father started it before he passed. Said he'd finish it come spring. Her voice caught. He never did. Callum's gaze didn't waver. Maybe we finish it together. They stood facing each other, the lantern throwing long shadows behind them. Her fingers curled at her sides. I've never built anything from the ground up, she whispered. I have, he said, but never with someone I'd want to keep. The next morning, they hiked to the bluff before sunrise. Hollis wore her father's old coat, too big in the shoulders, sleeves rolled twice. Callum had brought a spade and a small hatchet, and they walked in silence, boots crunching over dry grass brittle from the first freeze. The cabin's bones were still their four walls half standing. Rafters collapsed inward like a broken ribcage. Hollis ran her hand along the remaining doorframe, fingers tracing the old chisel marks. He stepped inside, testing the floorboards with his weight. Beams are good, he said. We'll need fresh planks. Maybe cedar if Dan'll part with any. She nodded. I can trade 2 jars of preserves and a sack of flour. He grinned, not sharp but warm. You drive a hard bargain. She knelt to pick up a rusted hinge from the dirt. I've lived off harder. They started the work that day. By the time the sun was overhead, they'd cleared out the fallen rafters and set aside the boards worth salvaging. Hollis worked alongside him, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back with a cornhusk comb. She didn't tire easy, and she never asked him to slow. That night, they sat on the cabin's old step, stomachs full of beans and salt pork. Stars blinked out above them, the air crisp, the silence companionable. Callum rested his arms on his knees. You ever think about what kind of life you want? She thought a long time before answering. One where I'm not looking over my shoulder. He nodded. Me too. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth. It was the ribbon she'd worn in her hair the day he first brought her coffee. She placed it in his hand. My mother gave me this. Said it was lucky. Callum turned it over between his fingers. You sure you want me to have it? I'm sure, she said. He slipped it into his shirt pocket. Then I'll keep it close. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek atop her hair. The wind moved through the grass behind them, quiet and sure, like it had someplace to be but no hurry in getting there. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. In the days that followed, they raised new beams, laid fresh flooring, and patched the roof with pine shingles Dan traded for a week's worth of firewood. Hollis stained her hands with pitch, and Callum split his thumb open on a nail, but neither complained. One morning, as they leveled the last window frame, a passing wagon slowed near the bluff. The driver squinted up at them and spat into the dirt. "Would you look at that?" he said to no one in particular. "Bad luck, Beauregard. Building a house. Hope it don't fall in on her." Callum stepped down from the ladder, hammer in hand. "You can keep moving." The driver looked him over, then clicked his tongue at the mule and rolled off, laughter trailing behind. Hollis stood still, her jaw set. Callum turned to her. "You want me to go after him?" She shook her head. "Let him talk." He waited. "You remember what you told me?" she said. "About fear and how it don't look like me?" "I do." "Well, I'm starting to believe you." He reached for her hand, rough with work, calloused fingers threading through hers. "You should," he said, "because it's the truth." They stood there in the frame of the house they were building, wind tugging at their coats, the roof above them whole for the first time in years. And this time, when she smiled, it didn't carry an ounce of sorrow. Hollis stood at the hearth of the cabin, back straight against the cold morning. The first snowfall had come in the night, thin and white, clinging to the window panes and softening the sound of the world. She'd woken before Callum, pulled on her boots in the half-light, and stoked the stove with kindling they split the day before. Callum stirred behind her, the bed creaking as he sat up and rubbed sleep from his eyes. His hair was flattened on one side, the quilt bunched around his waist. She turned, holding out a tin cup of hot chicory brew. "You let me sleep too long," he said, voice low from sleep. "You needed it," she said. "You were walking heavy yesterday." He took the cup, fingers brushing hers warm, familiar now, like the closing of a gate that once swung wild in the wind. "Ground's frozen deep," he said. "We'll need to finish chinking the back wall today if we don't want the wind sneaking through." "I already hauled the mortar from the shed," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter. "It's by the ladder." He smiled at her, then just enough to show, no more. By midday, they were shoulder to shoulder outside, packing clay and straw between the logs. Hollis worked in silence, her breath rising in small white plumes, her hands red from the cold. Callum paused only to stretch his back and glance at the sky. "You ever think about bringing animals up here?" he asked. She glanced over. "You mean livestock? Maybe a milk cow. Chickens if we build a coop." She set her trowel down. "You want to run a farm? I want to wake up with you and have something worth tending. Doesn't matter if it walks on 4 legs or 2. She bent to scoop another handful of clay, but her hand slowed. "There's a lot I never let myself picture. A home. A man I didn't have to fear losing. A future that didn't end before it began." He crouched beside her, one knee in the snow. "What do you see now?" She looked at the cabin, smoke curling from the stovepipe, the porch rail she'd sanded smooth herself, the broom leaning just right against the doorframe. "I see a table with 2 chairs. I see supper warming while snow piles up outside. I see a man who doesn't leave." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the wind catching it a moment later. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. That night, after the last of the mortar had been pressed and the tools cleaned, they sat by lamplight with a pot of beans bubbling over the stove. Hollis mended a tear in one of his shirts, needle glinting as it passed through the fabric. Callum carved a handle for the new drawknife he'd traded for, the shavings curling at his feet. Neither spoke for a long while. The silence between them had changed again, no longer careful or new, but full of things already known. "I got a letter last week," she said, tying off the thread. He looked up. "From a woman I used to know in Cheyenne. Said there's a school there that trains teachers for frontier towns. They're looking for someone to take up a post come spring." Callum set the carving knife down. "You thinking of going?" She folded the shirt and set it aside. "I was thinking we could go. Together." He leaned forward, arms resting on his knees. "You want to leave the cabin?" "I want to use it. Set someone else up here, maybe. A family passing through. But I want to build something that lasts. And I want you beside me when I do it." He nodded. "I've been thinking the same. Thought maybe we'd take the wagon down to Fort Bridger after the freeze. Sell some of the hides I've got stored. Buy a team." She stood and stepped closer, hand reaching for his. "Then let's do it," she said. "Let's go build a life on purpose." He rose with her, their hands clasped, the stove casting gold across their faces. He didn't say anything else, just kissed her, slow and certain, their breath mingling between them. 3 months later, the thaw came early. The snow melted down into the roots, and the ground softened beneath the wagon wheels. Hollis stood with her satchel packed and her coat mended at the cuffs, watching Callum hitch the mare to the cart. The cabin stood behind them, smoke still rising, the door latched with new iron. They left a note for Dan, tucked under a clean plate on the porch table. "If anyone needs a warm roof and a place to begin, let them start here. It's been good to us." As they rode south, the wind at their backs, Hollis held Callum's hand in her lap. She leaned against his shoulder, quiet and content. He glanced down at her. "You ready?" "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He kissed the top of her head. "That's enough for me." They passed the edge of the bluff, the cabin disappearing behind the slope, and never once did she look back. Years later, in a small schoolhouse outside Green River, a class of children pressed around a woman with braid pinned neat along her crown and ink on her fingers. They listened as she read aloud from a book she'd written herself, pages bound with twine and care. Outside, a man mended the schoolyard fence, his hands rough but sure. When the bell rang, he tipped his hat to the children and waited for her on the steps. She reached for his hand, and they walked home together, past the garden they'd planted, past the coop bustling with hens, toward the house they built with their own hands. No one whispered anymore. No one turned away. And when the wind passed through the cottonwoods, it carried only the sound of belonging.